Hi there, this is Kristen Rodier, coordinator of Philosophy 252. Um, Unit 4 really covers classification, definition, and definition, arguments from definition and enthymemes. And this is really another unit, and I'm going to say this about all of the units, where we're really learning through practice. So doing the exercises in the textbook and working through the quizzes, all of these things are going to solidify how to apply and use these concepts. But what we're getting into right now is building on earlier work around dialectical acceptability. So when we are dialoguing, when we are finding out whether or not our claims are true, we need to get that singular proposition so that we can see what is meant by our sentence. And actually that works for arguments that rely on dialectical acceptability. They also work for arguments that are deductive in quality. But what we really need is precision and clarity in all of the language that we use. And so what that means is getting into those, zooming in on those building blocks of language. And in a way, we can think about our language as a classification system itself, a big classification that classifies our world. So this early bit on classification is thinking about how when we're using words, we want to pay attention to the system that they're using. So if we have multiple words, or if we have only one word for something, and we're trying to name something in the world, we want it to be really clear. So we want the kind of thing that we're picking out and the way that we're classifying it to rely on a system where our concepts are exhaustive. So we're able to categorize everything we want to categorize, and it's exclusive. And our classification system also has to be clear, which means that it has to make sense to the people using it, and it has to be adequate. So that means that we have a task that we're trying to achieve in classifying and organizing, and how we do that has to be able to help us achieve our goals. So a lot of that depends on the kinds of things being classified. So are they physical objects in the world? Are they concepts? Are they, scientific claims? All of this really matters for how we try to map the world. And then when we do so, we start using these claims and we want to clarify them in our arguments. And so what we might end up having to do is really look at definitions. And definitions, you'll see this in the chapter and you'll have a chance to evaluate some of the examples, but definitions are really about essential features of the thing being defined. So what are the features of the thing without which it's not that thing? So we don't want to miss anything. It's very similar to these classifications. We don't want to miss anything, but we don't want to include anything that's not necessary. And definitions, like classification systems, the definitions stand in relation to each other, so they're codified. And within them, there's knowledge contained within how we define things. And so that means that we can evaluate them for what they're doing, what we need them to do, and how they map the world. And so one of the ways we can evaluate them is with these sort of negative features and finding out that they're not too broad, so they don't cast too wide of a net. They're not too narrow, so they're not overly specific. They include the things we want them to include. They avoid vagueness and obscurity, so they actually give us something that we can rule in and rule out, and they don't make it more difficult to understand. Another one is avoiding circularity. So there we really have to look at whether or not we're defining something in the terms that are given, and we don't want them to be negative. So we don't just want to say, well, ibuprofen is not Tylenol, right? We want to know what ibuprofen is. So we don't just say what something is not, and we don't just give a sort of slanted or biased opinion. So here you could imagine a person arguing by defining something as, healthcare is the way that citizens soak the government for money or something like that. That would be a slanted and biased definition of healthcare, and we wouldn't want to accept those terms if we're having an argument. But if we have a good argument, if we have a good definition, we can deduce certain things from it. So we can make explicit what is implicit. So for example, we can evaluate then an argument from definition for validity. And here's where we start to get into enthymemes. So the connection between an argument from definition and an enthymeme is that they're both containing information where if we make it explicit, it is a valid argument. So an enthymeme has an unstated premise, whereas an argument from definition has a feature of the definition that is not explicitly stated, but if we draw it out, we conclude necessarily that is entailed.